Welcome to Confessions Beyond the Food. I'm your host, Nancy Ridlen. Let's dig in and get inspired. Hi, welcome to Confessions Beyond the Food. My name is Nancy Ridlen and I'm with W3 Sales. Today we have Aaron Fish in the studio. He's founder and CEO of Trestle and is a seasoned professional in the hospitality industry, specifically known for his leadership in senior living. Welcome, Aaron.
Hi, Nancy. Thanks for having me. Excited.
I'm so excited to have you here today. So we're going to do things a little bit different. We're going to have you do your confession to start off with. So
Yeah.
tell us something none of us know.
So, kind of ironic that we're doing this newish form of broadcasting, but when I was in college, I actually was a co-host on two news radio campus shows. So I went to school at Kansas State University, and we had our news program was called A Purple Affair, which because the school colors are purple. And so I was a co-host on that show, and then we had another one called Campus Live. And so it was the kind of news and talk portion of the radio station, and I was co-host for those shows for a year.
That's amazing. So you are comfortable in this space.
Yes, very much so.
You never knew that this was going to prepare you for what you did today. Do you feel like that sometimes?
No, for sure. It's one of those like, how did I wind? Oh, I came full circle. So that's kind of cool. So
So tell us about how you got from broadcast journalism to an expert in senior living.
So my college career was kind of a little bit of a journey. Some of us were like that. And so I actually went to school as a computer science major, but then I didn't really like that. I wanted something where my personality could come through, and it just was really kind of stodgy and boring, the people I was working with. So I got into mass communications because I loved the idea of being on the radio, doing TV work. I ran some cameras for the local campus TV station even, but I just never really found my niche there. And so I got into the hospitality management program, and that's where I really was like, I could connect with people. My personality really came through, and it was kind of this way of service, and I've just loved doing it, and kind of been doing that ever since. I got into the hotel industry from there, worked at a hotel for about 7.5 years, and then stumbled into senior living food service, and have been there for the last 21 years.
That's awesome. I mean, that's what happens, everybody. If you're thinking about getting into hospitality, it sucks you in. You will never get out.
Right. Exactly.
You will never get out. It's so fun. And I love that you're dedicated to service. So tell us a little bit about, your experience with senior living and where it's led you to today.
Yeah. So I said I stumbled into senior living. I got engaged 20 some odd years ago, and I needed to move to where my fiance was, right? And so I took a job at a continuing care retirement community as a dining room manager. Was a dramatic shift from hotels to the senior living. But initially it was, well, this was a good little placeholder. It was, good pay, everything was fine. And then I was going to go back into hotels, and right place, right time. Over the course of the next 18 months, the COO on that campus was like, we need to be less institutional and more hospitality oriented. And so my experience with hotels and my hospitality management degree all came to play. And I wound up going from a dining room manager to the director of dining services for this 900 person campus in Kansas City. So fortunately, being a food and beverage director at a hotel helped me with that transition, but I had to learn so much more about senior living and the healthcare aspects of it, and how institutional food and hospitality and that whole transition really kind of led me to this idea of senior living was and still is somewhat behind kind of what the trends and everything you see in restaurants and hotels and kind of that commercial food service world. And so I've always kind of tried to position myself and take opportunities where I could go into an organization and bring that hospitality forward mindset to our daily operation. So it's not just, hey, we've got to serve 3 meals a day because it's required by the rules, but we're going to create 3 service experiences around food for the residents we serve. And so I've kind of had that driving passion through not only that role, but getting into the kind of corporate side of building programs for operators, which then led me to what I'm doing now with my own company, Trestle Hospitality Concepts, where I do basically fractional executive work in food and hospitality for senior living operators.
That's incredible. I love that you saw a need and how to bring hospitality to the next level in senior living. And what a cool journey. I mean, within 18 months, you're like running the show.
Yeah,
And
it was trial by fire, drinking from a fire hose. Think of all the cliches. That's what it was for sure.
yes. And then you prior to this, you managed a group that they had 50 plus properties. And
Yeah.
so
Now, the last role I took before I started my company, I was the senior vice president of food and beverage for an operator. 54 properties in 6 different states across the Southeast and Texas. And so, it was a lot. But they were, they were a fairly new company. A lot of experience on the executive team, but newer into the management realm when I started with them. And I was with them for 5.5 years and was basically started. I was handed a cycle menu, an order guide for purchasing, and a brand new point of sale system that we never wound up using because it was not designed for senior living. And that was it. And so it was, let's build this program from the ground up. And what is the strategy behind that? How do you build a regional team that can help support that many locations? And when I started, they only had 18. So we not only built the program around food and hospitality, but we also acquired and grew our portfolio. So it was not just the operational pieces, but there was design development for how kitchens would operate in new builds, the training and development pieces that go into having to oversee a large food service operation like that. So a lot of that kind of let me see that there was so many smaller operators that need that kind of support. And so that's what I do now with Trestle is I work with those smaller regional operators, maybe 15 locations or so or less, and provide that fractional executive strategic support for their food and hospitality operations.
So when they come to you, what's kind of the first thing you attack? Like, what do you see as the biggest opportunity to bring them, into not even compliance, but just to today's standards?
Yeah, usually what I find with these smaller operators is that they've kind of given their local chefs or directors the keys to that castle. And if you've done a really good job of hiring, then they're going to be successful. But if you've missed the mark on the hire, then who knows what you're going to get, right? And especially with turnover, right? Like you may have a great person, they move on to another opportunity. Now the entire knowledge base of how food service should happen leaves with them. And so what I find is it's almost, you have to start with the basics of, well, what kind of training do you have in place? What does your menu program look like? What are you trying to accomplish with service standards? And so it really is, let's lay a foundation based on their values, their approach to serving people. And then from there, we can then start adding the niceties of, well, let's look at programs for resident engagement and programs for like memory care versus assisted living or independent living. And then kind of from there saying, all right, now let's look at food service as a revenue opportunity. So it's kind of starting at that baseline of helping them understand what they want with a food service program, and then starting to build based on getting those things in place.
So when you work with properties around 15 or less, are a lot of them growing, or are they renovating or adding on? What is them?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I have, two of my bigger clients are in growth mode. So I started with one, and they had two communities that were literally a mile apart. And they've built, they've acquired, they're just looking at acquisition opportunities. They've got a pretty aggressive growth plan to go from those two. By this time next year, hopefully they have 8 or 10 locations that they're working with. Another client of mine, is their first community is a renovation, but they're also looking to make acquisitions. And so, right now in the space, there's been a little bit of a lull in new development just because of the way the economics have worked around, interest rates and construction costs. But these smaller operators are most of the ones that I see are being really smart and strategic about, they're creating a regional footprint. They're not trying to have, 15 locations in 5 different states. Both these clients are all within 2 or 3 hours of themselves with all of their locations. And that's very smart and very strategic, right? There's a lot of lower overhead that comes with that. And it allows us to, be more strategic with the team as to how we work together.
That's really, really interesting. I didn't even think about that. Does the regional, having something more regional, affect like the menu and what, type of food goes out? Because have you found in different states, everybody's kind of different on preferences?
Oh, for sure. With my prior company, we were in 6 different states from Arizona all the way to Florida. And so what menus worked in Arizona didn't work in East Texas, didn't work in South Florida, right? And so there you're working on 3 or 4 different cycle menus and alternate menus and always available menus, because everybody has different preferences for those regions. Where the one operator I work with in Florida, they're in Florida, right? So we can, the biggest difference there is we have one community has more of a Jewish kosher like preferences. But outside of that, we're able to do menus that are much more similar in regionality and in ingredients and in profiles, because they're all within, like I said, 2 hours of each other. So the regionality is the same.
Yeah, and just the standards, the health standards and are similar. You don't have to learn different states and their
Yes.
laws. I mean, I can't imagine the complexity of that.
No, it's nice to be able to pull everyone together on a Zoom call and do a training with everybody and cover regulatory stuff and food code items and food safety specifics, because like you said, it's one state, it's all one set of rules. And it makes it easy to do that training. Whereas larger footprint means, like you said, I got to have 6 different sets of regulations, and I have to know the intricacies. Even something as simple as, one state requires hot holding temperatures to be 140, even though the food code says 135, right? Little things like that, like you got to know the nuances when you're in a bigger footprint. So these regional operators that I'm working with really do have some advantages, I think, that these larger operators maybe don't have when it comes to those kinds of things.
So, what are the biggest challenges for these operators from the operations side?
So, if you'd asked me that a year ago, I would have said staffing and labor. I really think that's starting to correct itself. I feel like people are more engaged. They're seeing the benefits of maybe working in senior living. Really now, I think the biggest costs are the biggest challenges are food costs. We're struggling with, we've had these huge inflationary spikes over the last 24 months or so. And we're seeing some relief, but it's not coming all the way back down. And so operators are struggling with how much rent can I increase by, what percentages am I able to, how much can these residents actually take on? And all of these additional expenses, wages have increased, food costs have increased. So margins are shrinking. So what are the opportunities there? And so there's a lot of creativity with the way we're writing menus, and cross utilization is a key thing there. And really getting operators that understand that they need to hire really good, talented people who understand things like cooking from scratch or speed scratch. And that's where you're going to find a lot of cost savings. It's not going to be hiring cheap labor and hiring and finding, convenience foods. It's really more of a reverse of, I need talented people who understand how to manage the food and do food well.
Yeah, I didn't even think about that. That as a property, you can't raise rent. You can't raise rent in the middle of the year.
Yeah.
As a restaurant or a hotel or anybody in the hospitality industry, you can change your menu. With you guys, it's not like that. You have to, that's interesting.
Yeah, it's one of those things where if a chef or a director comes from the restaurant side of things, and I've experienced this, is that they don't understand, okay, well, food costs have gone up. Well, we just need to charge more, right? We got to hit our 28, 30, 32, 35% food cost. Well, that's not, like you said, it's not how senior living works. Like, you get a per resident day food cost, anywhere from $7.50 to $10. Some higher end places are more, but that $8 to $9.50 range is what most operators are looking at these days. And even that can get tight. So it's a different way of thinking about it. But there's opportunities, if you're creative, to do a lot of things with your menu. But also, I think with the new shift in demographics that we're seeing, there's also opportunity for even looking at revenue opportunities with food service, where maybe 5 years ago, people weren't thinking that way.
So how are properties able to make, revenue?
So it really goes into kind of changing into what I call a restaurant mindset, right? It's looking at, what are ways that I can generate revenue? Can I create a catering program where residents are able to do family events? A lot of communities, one example, for a catering event, they have pools, in these bigger buildings, but they don't really get used outside of like aquatics exercise classes. So why not set up a program where you can have grandkids come in for a pool party and then cater and rent space and generate revenue that way? Do a la carte pricing for guests that come and visit. So instead of what senior living has always done is, oh, we're going to charge $7, $10, $12 per meal, create an actual a la carte menu where, all right, well, maybe I just want a salad and soup. And so I'm going to pay for that at $4 or $5 like I would a restaurant, and then creating discount programs, selling gift cards to family members, a bar program, revenue for around beverages and cocktails and mocktails. Those are all opportunities that can be layered on top of the base meal program and the regulatory meal programs that will not only help generate additional revenues, but also create a lot of more marketability for kind of the boomers that we're going to start seeing moving into communities here in the next 24 to 36 months.
So what do you think is going to be the big difference in expectation from the boomers in the previous generation?
It's the experience level, right? The silent generation before them was very much I guess frugal is a good way to describe them. If it was a quality product, there wasn't a lot of negative feedback. It's like, you get what you get. If it's a good quality, then they're happy with it, right? Whereas boomers are more traveled, they have more of a culinary palate, they have more culinary experience. And so the expectation coming in is that this isn't just my 3 squares a day. It is, I'm coming here because I'm picking partly for the lifestyle. I'm coming here. I may have some assisted needs, healthcare wise, but I still have this expectation of higher service levels, of variety, of choice. And so the operators that are on the front line, on the front edge of this, really get the understanding of creating concepts and creating menu variety, and knowing that they've got to create an experience around what they're doing. Even if it is basic comfort food menu items, they still want an experience to go along with that.
So, I mean, lots has changed, right, since you've started. And
Yeah.
so what do you think is, I mean, what do you expect to see in the future, like 5 to 10 years down the road? Like, how will that change and how can these properties prepare for that?
I think they need to be flexible in how they use spaces, how they design spaces. Um, can they convert a dining room that traditionally would be, where I have just 3 meals, it doesn't change? Do they have little mini concepts inside of them? Do they have activity spaces that can be like a pop-up restaurant? What do they do around creating those experiences? And the other piece of it's going to be technology, right? If you need to drive revenue, you can't do that on an Excel spreadsheet. You got to have the technology to capture it. You need to understand preferences and choices and things like allergies and dietary needs. And so, you see this in hospitality now with like some of the hotel chains where they have the personalization, like they know what temperature you want your room, those kinds of things. And so I think there's going to need to be more technology integrated into communities to create these experiences. And we just have to, I think, really truly remember that at the end of the day, it's an industry of people serving people. And we cannot lose sight of having that personalized, elevated touch. So customer service, more training on how to interact with people is going to be key, because it can't be transactional. Senior living is always going to be relational in how we do things.
I mean, you're serving people in their home.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And
So it's a tricky balance of their home and hospitality. And I think that's where the industry is going to have to figure out that outside of their apartment needs to be maybe a little less homey and more experiency, but then inside of their apartment, they need to have access to all of those services just like they would currently in their physical homes now.
so are you seeing like the cafes and the different more concepts within the in the house in the homes?
A lot of communities, even assisted living communities, are looking at how do I create all of these spaces so I can have that variety, because as someone ages in place, they're still going to have these expectations. So I have a client who just opened a senior living, assisted living community, and they have a cafe where we're going to put in a revenue generating bistro concept. They have a full service bar. They have their main dining room concept. And so that's assisted living. Typically, you see this in independent living. And so there are just going to be a need for that variety, because it's not something that's going to be a market differentiator in 5 years. It's going to be a market expectation.
Interesting. I mean, that's so exciting. I think like lots of opportunity to like you said, adapt, change with the times and give our seniors like a great experience. I mean, that's what we do in our industry, right? Is like you said, is provide an experience. Food is fun. So, and that's a fun what we do. So are there any other tips as we wrap this up that you'd like to share for our listeners?
Yeah, I would tell, and this is kind of a selfish thing, but I would tell those chefs and directors that are in restaurants and hotels to not necessarily look down on the senior living space as that kind of bland, skilled nursing institutional opportunity. We need those hospitality trained, hospitality minded individuals to come into senior living. My background is in hotels. All of the really great regional directors, dining directors, corporate directors that I work with, that I have good relationships with, all have a background in hotels and restaurants. And those are going to be the people that are going to have really great opportunities in senior living to not only get better work-life balance and create a good lifestyle for themselves, but also help push this change in senior living that I think is coming and going to be needed and is going to be driven by those individuals.
Is the quality of life different, like on the side versus the hospitality? Just curious.
Yeah, I would say if you're working past 8 or 9 o'clock in the evenings in a community, then there's something wrong. Like, you get great work-life balance in senior living, and you still get to do all of the food things, all of the service things. You can create great menus, you can create great cocktail menus and beverage programs and customer service experiences. And so the chefs that I think are like, well, I want to stay in food, but I'm kind of tired of the rat race of the commercial food service, should definitely look at senior living, because once you're in it, like, you make these personal connections. And again, it's becomes relational and not transactional. And I think the quality of life immensely improves.
That's amazing. And Aaron has so many tips to share, and he also has a podcast. So Aaron, would you mind sharing ways that people can reach out to you for your services?
Absolutely. You can connect with us. Our website is TrestleHospitalityConcepts.com. The podcast is Tips from Trestle. You can find that anywhere you listen to podcasts. We have a lot of great conversations and really just trying to bring in that elevated experience for senior living operators. And obviously, you can connect with me on LinkedIn, Twitter, X, Instagram, all of the social media channels. We are all over the place, and we'd love to connect and let you learn more about us and learn about how we can support you in your operations.
Yeah, Aaron, you're a wealth of knowledge, and I'm really honored to have you on the podcast today and giving us some tips. And so we appreciate you guys joining in on this episode on Confessions Beyond the Food. See you next time. For more inspiration, follow our social media at W3Sales. Please like, comment, and subscribe. All the things. We would love to connect with you.